In this part of the lesson, we are studying in the study of the 10 Sefirot. We are in part 4 of the study of 10 Sefirot. We are in the Hebrew, page 270, Inner Observation, chapter 4, item 71. Again, item 71 in the Inner Observation of part 4. And in order to prepare ourselves for the study, we are going to do two things today. One thing is we're going to read a verse from Baal HaSulam about the intention during the study. Then we will watch a clip from Rav that relates to the content of the lesson, and then we'll move to the lesson itself. Baal HaSulam writes, in the introduction to the study of the 10 Sefirot, item 97. During the practice of Torah, every person must labor in it and set his mind and heart to find the light of the king's face in it, meaning attainment of open providence, called light of the face. Any person is capable of it, as it is written, those who seek me shall find me. Thus, one needs nothing in this matter except the labor alone. Again, Baal HaSulam, the introduction to the study of 10 Sefirot, item 97. During the practice of Torah, every person must labor in it and set his mind and heart to find the light of the king's face in it, meaning attainment of open providence, called light of the face. Any person is capable of it, as it is written, those who seek me shall find me. Thus one needs nothing in this matter except the labor alone. Now we will see a clip of Rav, please.
The fifth type are the vessels of the first expansion called the light of Ab. The fifth type are vessels that separated from the upper light called the coarse light, because after the 10 Sefirot of the Guf expanded from Pev, Ak till the Tabul, and the third type, then the upper light returned and departed from them, and the vessels remained empty of light. And there's a big discernment here between what the vessels before the lights and the vessels that came after the lights were in them. Because the first expansion, even though it's considered a vessel of reception in practice in the Guf, they still are not considered real vessels yet. Why? Because of the great importance the vessels had there. He mentions there, the Ali, that the vessels and the light inside it are mixed with one another. Why? There's no difference between light and vessel. They both want to bestow. I took from my desires such desires that by the reflected light they completely resemble the light that enters them. Otherwise, how will they enter? So there's no difference between light and vessel. They are both in bestowal. It's not even felt, the light or the vessel. Because in spirituality, the quality determines. It doesn't matter if this is matters existence from existence or that's existence from absence. If they work in the same way, they're the same. That's what happens to us when we draw the lights into the vessels from the pet till the tabul. They are completely equal. Otherwise, how could they be revealed? The lights in the vessels. So after the light departed from the vessel, then we can see their coarseness, because the point of judgment was revealed, the malchut, the point of restriction, that we cannot deal with these lights. That's still before the coarseness wasn't revealed. That was obviously in those vessels, but it wasn't revealed. Now, when the coarseness is revealed more, so the light's departed. And then the gap between light and vessel was apparent. And these vessels are called the coarse vessels. So this means it was always there. It just wasn't revealed towards the created being. That's why we say in a certain height that the lights and vessels were awakened in that height where there was a decision in the Pev Rosh. Obviously, the light and vessel were equal. Now, what about the other? If more coarseness comes, they're not equal anymore. So the entrance of the lights cause the formulation of the vessel.
The entry of the light causes the formulation of the Kli. The study of 10 Sefirot, part 4, Inner Observation, chapter 4, item 71. We're going to study with Rabash.
You're asking what's the difference between a clothing record or a record of coarseness. A record of clothing is called that there's an impression left from the light that was clothed in the vessel. A record of coarseness, that a record was left the way it extended what it wanted. So we say no, the last phase was lost, and he's left with an overcoming of the conditions he had with the upper light. The light wants to bestow. He also wants to be a bestower. So first, he could have said, let's say, 3 phases in order to bestow. If so, it would adapt himself to the upper light. Now, not anymore. More than 2 phases it can't. That's called that now it cannot use its will to receive. Why? Why earlier it could use the will to receive? It could have made a screen upon it, and now it cannot. So, 71. What's the headline? The 5th kind is the vessels of the first expansion called coarse light. 71. The 5th kind is vessels that were emptied of the upper light. Called coarse light. So what's written here? After the 10 Sefirot of the Guf expanded, let's start over. 71. The 5th kind is vessels that were emptied of the upper light. That these vessels, called coarse light, what does it mean, coarse light? So he explains. After the 10 Sefirot of the Guf expanded, from the Pev Ak to the Tabul as the 3rd kind. You remember what the 3rd kind was? 2nd kind was in the Rosh. The 3rd kind is called the 10 Sefirot of the Toch. So the upper light departed from within them once again. And the vessels remained empty of light. There's a big difference here. Although in the above first expansion, they are discerned as actual vessels of reception, so we learned that the first expansion, called Partzuf Galgalta, they are nevertheless not regarded as real vessels yet. You could notice a difference between light and vessel. Even though there are vessels, it's still called that you can't recognize it. Why? Because of the great importance that the vessels have there, as it is written here in Inner Light. This is why the Ari says there that the vessels and the third light within them are mixed. However, after the light departs from there, their coarseness became apparent, and a difference is made between the light and the vessel. That is why these vessels are called coarse light. So what is he saying? He says, the third kind of the vessels is called the light that expands from Peh of Rosh. What was in potential before is now expanding in actual. So he's actually receiving. But still, it is not considered a vessel yet. What does it mean, considered a vessel? That the deficiency was apparent between light and vessel because of the importance, as we gave an allegory about it once. When a person is hungry and you give him a meal, he cannot say that the hunger is a deficiency. On the contrary, it gives him taste for the meal. Just as the meal gives taste, also when he is hungry, he also gives. When he's hungry, there's also taste in the meal. But when he's hungry and he has nothing to eat, he doesn't have a meal, that's called hungry within a deficiency. So he says, in the first expansion in the Partzuf Galgalta, where he includes his vessel, that's why the vessel was not called a deficiency yet. So the Ari calls it light and vessel are mixed in one another. But after the light departed, then their coarseness became apparent. So we see this is a light and this is a vessel. Seeing, because the light departed from the vessel wasn't okay. So then these vessels are called coarse light. What is a coarse light? That to begin with, it was revealed that it was also coarse, and not specifically now. Just now it's revealed. So you're asking me, what's the difference between the will to receive in Ein Sof to the will to receive in Partzuf Galgalta? You're asking me. So again, in Ein Sof, it received the light, receiving in order to receive. Here, he received just a part of what he could aim in order to bestow. The rest remained as surrounding light. So he says, a part of what he receives in order to bestow, he receives that part, and that part isn't called a deficiency in the vessels. On the contrary, they give us importance that they could receive light in those vessels, that he could receive them in order to bestow. So that is also coarseness, but the coarseness was in order to bestow, and the light would shine in them. So that's not called a deficiency. But afterwards, when the light departed, why did it depart? Why did the light depart? Because it was lacking equivalence of form. So to begin with, that's called that reflective light that was in order to bestow, that didn't use the wool to receive, it was only a correction, not something actual. Evidence for that is, wow, the light, the reflected light departed. That's called that the coarse light did not rise up. That's not called a light. That's born out of two forces. From one course of rejection, what we learned, the light that's rejected. So now we find that he lost that force. Which force? The force of the screen. So the light departed. Why? You have to say that this is coarse and this is refined, that there's no equivalence between them. That's why it's called that the vessels now that are, this is a coarse light and this is a refined light. So what does he want to tell us by that? That now the difference between them is apparent. What he said earlier was, although they are regarded as from the pet to the taboo, when they actually receive, so the actual vessels of reception, they are nevertheless not regarded as real vessels, yet because of the great importance that the vessels have there, as is written there in inner light, that the light could shine in them. But now when the light departs, so there's a question, why did it depart? Because there's coarseness in the vessels. That's why there's a recognition of that coarseness. So the sixth kind, now we'll understand more, is that the vessels that were emptied of their lights and the records that remained sustained them. What is the sixth type? 72. The sixth kind is vessels that were emptied. When? After the departure of the light. And the records in the vessels are records from the lights that departed, remained in them. The part that remained from the light, the records sustain and revive the vessels to make them suitable to acquire their lights as in the beginning. This record illuminates them to extend the light again. This is part of the records that remain in the vessels to bring livelihood to the vessels. Also, they shine to the Parzuf after them, as the Ari says here, that the names shine here too and below too. So what he says here, also they shine to the Parzuf after them. That's what he says. As the Ari says here. So I do not interpret what the words of the Ari. I want to interpret what he mentioned there in inner light. So he says this. The records that remain from the lights that departed, we find two discernments in them. One, for their own need. Two, for the second Parzuf that will be, meaning, except for saying that the records remain to bring livelihood to the vessels. He says that the screen was incorporated of all the records that rose up to the Rosh of the degree. He asks for the force of the screen on his records. The upper one. Give him a screen on those records. How much? According to the records that remain there. So you have to discern, one, that the record brings livelihood to its own vessels. Two, the records are the cause for the second degree to come. Here he mixes things. So look again what he wrote in 72. The sixth kind is vessels that were emptied after the departure, and records from the lights that departed remain in them. What's he write after that? The records sustain and revive the vessels to make them suitable to acquire their lights as in the beginning. That means afterwards, when the light comes again, it'll have forces to receive. That's one. But who brings them the light? That they will have something to receive. You see? Here it's written, to make them suitable to acquire their lights as in the beginning. So who will give them the light? That's why we learn the screen rises from the records to the Rosh of the degree. The upper one performs a coupling for him, and then expands an allegory, an example. The screen of Galgalta that had coarseness of phase 4, the screen incorporated from the records. The last phase was lost, let's say. It ascended to the Rosh of Galgalta, and a coupling was made on the third phase, and that expanded below to where? To the previous vessels. We find they are worthy to receive, but who brought them the light that they will have what to attain? Those are the records. And here, what else did we learn? That the records that rise up, except for them filling the empty vessels of Parzuf Galgalta, called Parzuf Ab, the coupling that was in Rosh of Galgalta on phase 3, when the degree of Ab came, so that's called the inner Ab, since it clothes in the internality of the vessels of Galgalta. So we also learn, then came a coupling on the taboo. The screen of the taboo that was in the Rosh descended below. After the coupling, returned to the Chazeh. And since it was above, it was incorporated from the coarseness from below upward, called coarseness of the Rosh. Then a new coupling was made at the Chazeh of Galgalta. From the Chazeh until the Peh comes the external Ab. And below that, the goof of the external Ab, and that's already called the lower Parzuf. We find, according to that the records shine also in the Parzuf of life, too. So they shine and they cause, meaning the records illuminate as they are. Meaning, not specifically in phase 3 in them, but as they remained. So he doesn't explain it, he just mentions it. As they had light in the beginning, now they also have light. It was always like in the beginning. 73. The seventh kind is vessels that were emptied, and no records were left in them. So the seventh kind is vessels that were emptied after the departure. No records of the lights that departed were left in them. They are the last phase of every Partzuf and expansion, because the last phase does not leave a record, as the Ari says. This is the same as been explained above. We learned that we are left with vessels, and afterwards the lights come to them. But we also are left with vessels that don't have lights. That's the seventh kind. So which vessels remain that the lights didn't come? The vessel of the last phase. What is the last phase? In each and every degree, there is a last phase. So the light shines till there. So in allegory, if in Partzuf Galgalta, we call that phase 4. Partzuf Ab, until here it's phase 3 and no more. Partzuf Sag, until here. So we find that the last phase of each and every degree is lost, and every time you have a different last phase. So he says, what? The seventh kind is vessels that were emptied after the departure, and no records of the light that departed were left in them. There he learns and he asks, if we say vessel of Malchut, we're not left with a vessel, but a light without a vessel also has to be brought to life. So he says that the light of the Yesod shines, a record of the light of the Yesod illuminates in the vessel of Malchut. In order to understand what he says here in the seventh type, we should look at 43. That's where he writes the same thing.
43. It's written the same thing there. Know that this record of the female phase, which is called the final or the last discernment, did not remain after the departure of the light from there. And though she is not lost, as there is no absence in the spiritual, she remains silent and completely inactive until the end of correction. The Ari writes that the last phase does not leave a record, and only the record of the male phase remains there, the record of clothing. The Ari writes that when the Keter rises and departs, it leaves one record in its place, and the vessel to shine from it to Chokhmah below it, after it rises and departs. See in the inner light. This is already, there's all the connection with what we talked about. Only what? The vessel that needs to remain in the final correction will be receiving light again, so that vessel needs to have someone to sustain it, give it vitality, and so this vital does not give it life. Look at the first line there where it's written. First line there, it's written like this. However, the light of Malchut does not leave a record in its vessel. If so, who sustains the vessel of Malchut? Only the record that the light of Yesod left in its vessel. The illumination is extended from there to the vessel of Malchut after the departure of her light. 74. What is he saying here? The headline? The eighth kind is vessels that were qualified for the purpose of the next parzuf, which follows it. What is he saying here? We'll explain it. The eighth kind is the phase of vessels that were prepared and qualified in the parzuf. Not just the vessel from them for their own sake, but the kli for the purpose of the next parzuf, which follows it. Brought in the Ari's words. Even the vessel of Keter, which the Ari says there that it was not made in the first parzuf, but only in the following parzuf, the phase of the vessel of Keter from the male phase was nevertheless prepared from the first parzuf. What's written here? We learned that there are two kinds of vessels. In the parzuf of Galgalta, there was the light that was intermingled with or mixed with the light together. You remember that. When I need for it to be a kli, then the lights have departed, and we learned it such, if you remember, after the light of the kli of Malchut departed, so now a coupling took place in the vessel of Yesod. So the light of Yesod descended with sparks to the reflected light, sparks of reflected light, which he calls them the vessel of Malchut. So there was a beating there. Why? There was this clash. Why? Because in the vessel of Malchut there was the level of Keter. In phase 3, which is called the vessel of Yesod, one smaller degree does not want to receive it. And what is this beating? Since there is above the vessel of Yesod, and the next light that is now anew, as far as phase 4, this is only a record. Therefore, he learns that the light overcomes seemingly, and the sparks descend, and the reflected light to the vessel of Malchut. This is a vessel that had the level of Keter. By this, a diminution took place in the vessel of Keter, and a kli for later was made. Later, when the light of Keter will come, and they will bring the light of Chokhmah in the vessel of Keter, there's already a preparation so that the light of Chokhmah will illuminate for it and qualify the phase of Chokhmah that fell into the kli of Keter. I'll give an example. What is he speaking of there? The departure of the light and these beatings that were in that nekudot between discernment to discernment, phase to phase, made a vessels for who? For the second parzuf. So we need to know, if I want to distinguish, there's another eighth kind called vessels that were made not for the sake of the degree itself, but rather to qualify the vessel for the second parzuf. Now we will go over again over 74. The eighth kind is the phase of vessels that were prepared and qualified in the parzuf for the purpose of the next parzuf, which follows it. Brought in the Ari's words. He says, even the vessel of Keter, which the Ari says there, that it was not made in the first parzuf, but only in the following parzuf, the phase of the vessel of Keter from the male phase was nevertheless prepared from the first parzuf. What is male? What is female? We learned there that in Parzuf Ab, there was the four of clothing. And four of clothing is called the light of Keter. So he says the record remained in his Keter that cannot be the same thing. Again, he says it this way. Each degree receives its diminution from the upper degree, which is smaller than her. It turns out that he's saying that the light of Keter, which emerged on the vessel of Keter, and above the Keter there is no one to beat it, to strike it and diminish it. It turns out that it is not made into a vessel of Keter, but rather later in the second Partzuf, after the light of Ab came, and there was a matter of the beating there, the matter of the striking that the Ari brings, and then a vessel of the female of the light of Keter is made, meaning for the coarseness of phase 3. But for the phase of clothing of the male light that he's written there, he says it remains in the degree. How does he say it? It's written here. With that, nevertheless, the phase of the vessel of Keter from the male phase was nevertheless prepared from the first Partzuf, as it is explained in the other light. It simply remained, and the record remained, and therefore it could come to the same thing. That's also a little difficult. What's a little difficult? We say the male light is called the light of clothing, is the degree of Keter, or level of Keter. This was okay if the light of Keter would come back in return. We learned that if Keter comes upon clothing, only Vak of Keter illuminates and not the Keter in essence. And it's also not the same thing. And there's also a difference in this in the fine light of the Keter as well, and he doesn't explain that. So what we have to learn here is 75. What are we learning in 75? The above kind of vessels which we spoke of once is the male vessels in the next Partzuf that were prepared for the second Partzuf. So now he explains it a little bit more. 75. This above mentioned eighth kind, we learned, is the male vessels for the purpose of the next Partzuf. They come from the records that the lights left in the vessels after their departure, from the coarse light included in the records, meaning light, the male vessels were made. If so, he explains there about the records above. It's not a new thing. So now he is going to explain. It's nothing new. He's going to explain something, nothing new. Now I'm speaking about the ninth kind. The ninth kind is vessels, the vessels that were prepared in the Partzuf for the female vessels for the following Partzuf. Now we spoke about the eighth kind, where the vessels are from males for the second Partzuf. And we learned what's the difference between males and females. Males, the meaning is to the matter of clothing, meaning prior to that there was a level of Keter, and now it's also on the level of Keter, and the females are coarseness. In coarseness we learned the last phase is lost, and there's Here only the light of female as far as phase 3. This is what it says. The ninth kind is the vessels for the females that were prepared in the first Partzuf for the purpose of the following Partzuf, meaning in the second Partzuf, when the light of Chokhmah will come to the vessel of Keter. Is there a connection in there's being Chokhmah in a vessel of Keter? There needs to be some preparation in the vessel of Keter to be able to receive the light of Chokhmah. This is where he says, they were made, how, what was made of these vessels? Of the sparks that fall into the empty vessels after the light departed from them, which come from the illumination of the coupling in the upper phase of the empty vessel, as the Ari says. What's written here? Again, they were made of the sparks that fall into the empty vessels after the light departed from them, which come from the illumination of the coupling in the upper phase to the empty vessels. Meaning, a coupling was made upon phase 3, and he wants to fill the vessel of Malchut, as there's the light of phase 4 there, the light of the records of the level of Keter, and he does not want to receive it since the record of Keter is more important than phase 3 from the level of Chokhmah. But since this is only a record and it's not a true light, hence we learn that the light overcomes the record. And since there is a striking, he calls this sparks. Sparks of the level of Chokhmah that have fallen to the vessels that illuminate in the light of Keter. This becomes the preparation for later, when the light of Chokhmah will come into the vessels of Keter, since there's already sparks there of light of Chokhmah, as he says. The ninth kind are the vessels of the females that were prepared in the first Partzuf, for the purpose of the following Partzuf. In the Partzuf Nehi of Galgalta, when the departure was made, there was a preparation for the sake of Partzuf Ab. And they were made of the sparks that fall into the empty vessels after the light departed from them, which come from the illumination of the coupling in the upper phase of the empty vessel. As the upper phase are from the empty vessels, meaning the empty vessel is upon phase 3, let's say, and this is phase 2. It turns out that the phase of Binah fell into the vessel of Chokhmah. Hence, when the light of Binah came to the vessel of Chokhmah, there was already a preparation since there were sparks of Binah. The Ari says, in the next Partzuf, the lights change, and the light of Chokhmah comes in the vessel of Keter, the light of Binah in the vessel of Chokhmah, and the light of Zeranpin in the vessel of Binah. Hence, they needed vessels there that will be equal to their own phase of the light that now comes, the light of the Av, the light of Binah in the vessel of Chokhmah, for example. For this reason, these sparks had been prepared, the sparks that fell from the level of Binah into the empty vessel of the level of Chokhmah became the vessel for the light of Binah, which comes now in the vessel of Chokhmah. Similarly, the sparks that fell from the level of Zeranpin, from phase 1, into the vessel of the level of Binah, became a vessel for the light of Zeranpin, which comes later in the Partzuf Ab, the light of Zeranpin, in the vessel of Binah. And there's already a preparation for the sparks from phase 1 that have fallen to phase 2, as he says here. It turns out accordingly, what is the difference between the 8th kind and the 9th kind? The 8th kind speaks of vessels that were prepared for the next Partzuf. For Partzuf Ab, for the lights, the male lights. The 9th kind, vessels that were prepared from the first Partzuf for the sake of the light of females. Now, what is the light of male? What is the male of female? What is the light of male? What is the light of female? The light, the next light upon the night that comes upon the record of clothing. The clothing is called male. It has an 8th kind. These are vessels of light, of male light. The 9th kind are vessels of the light of female. What does it have to do in the light being male or female light? For the vessels, I understand. In vessels, we learn the differences. But in the light, how can you say the differences between male light and female light? Do you understand the question? Answer. The light that is revealed upon the record of clothing, and in the record of clothing there is no coarseness. This light I call male light. How is the name of the light? The light of Keter. If we're talking about Partzuf Galgalta, the records of the Partzuf of the Keter Partzuf that remains with the record, with every record in his record in his vessel, meaning that it will come later in the light of Keter to the vessel of Keter. There are records of every light in his vessel. Therefore, he says in item 75, this above mentioned 8th kind is the male vessels for the purpose of the next Partzuf. They come from where? From the records that the lights left in the vessels after their departure. From the coarse light included in the records, meaning reflected light. The male vessels were made. Now, what is the 9th kind, he says? The female vessels. What is the meaning of the vessels for females? In the Ab Partzuf, there was a coupling upon a face that is female and coarseness of phase 3. Coarseness is called female, and here comes the inner light upon the coupling on phase 3, and there was a exchange of lights. The light of Chokhmah came in the vessel of Keter. What connection is there, the light of Chokhmah in the vessel of Keter? After all, there is no equivalence between Chokhmah and Keter. So they say, in the first Partzuf, in the Partzuf Galgalta, immediately a preparation was prepared to be able to bring light of Chokhmah in the vessel of Keter. How was that? Since the records that were in the vessel of Malchut, let's say, of the degree of Keter, and the vessels became empty. And then came the coupling came upon the higher degree in the level of Keter. Striking took place. What's the striking here? She's, after all, Then the coupling came on the phase 3, the light, and the phase 3 wanted to illuminate the vessel of Malchut that was there, the light of Keter, and the record does not want to receive it. It came to the degree that is higher to the level of Keter. A striking took place. What's the striking here? After all, she is right. Since this was the true light, the level of Chokhmah, the light of level Chokhmah, is only a record, the remnants of what remained from the light. And then there's a striking. They're both correct. They say, since this is the actual light, therefore the light dropped sparks from the light of phase 3 to the vessel of Malchut, which has records of phase Keter. And we learned there that the light of the records emerged outwards from the Kli of Keter, and the records of sparks of phase 3 have fallen to the vessel of Keter. It turns out that now we have sparks of light of Chokhmah in a vessel of Keter. Therefore, later, when it comes in the Partzuf Ab, the light of Chokhmah in the vessel of Keter, there's already sparks of the phase of Chokhmah that are in the Kli of Keter. This is called the preparation for there to be equivalence with the light that will come later. Meaning there's a difference between the record that the new light does not come from, and the lights and not the records. Therefore, the next light renews always and overcomes. What is striking? If one is right, there's no striking. What does this mean? This is mine. So what's the quarrel about? A strike in spirituality is called that there's two contradicted things. Yes? And it's like one claims this is all mine and the other claims this is all mine. What's the claim? This is phase 4 and this is phase 3. What claim do I have? He has just a record. That's not real light, and therefore that's considered a striking. But who overcomes, they say? Whoever's more important. And since this light comes a new light, and there's only a record, therefore they take the new light. And since it comes as a striking, they call this by sparks. No. You are asking, why is it written that they ascended? Since here they're saying, why is it, they've fallen. It should say that they rose up. We are now talking not from the lights. We are speaking now about the vessels. The vessel of phase 4 is called a vessel of the last phase. And the Kli of phase 3 is called the upper one. If phase 3 illuminates to Malchut, is that called who ascended now? The sparks of phase 3 have fallen to the vessel, the empty vessel, which is phase 4. Therefore, as they fell below to the empty vessel, it is called that they have fallen. When it was above, I was together with her light, like in the level of Chokhmah. What place did they come to now? The empty vessel below. Hence it was concerned, phase 3 fallen to phase 4. That's why we're talking from vessels. Another example. Phase 2, the light that was illuminating in phase 2, and the empty vessel of phase 3 remained. That was, the light of Chokhmah was there before. So the light of Chokhmah that will be in the vessel of phase 3 does not